I'm Chisgule Gaming, and we've pulled down nearly 9 million kills with Alexander the Great alone. This commander is exceptional in 2020, but the role has definitely changed. They are one of my favorite commanders, one of the best commanders in Rise of Kingdoms, and in this video, we're going to talk about how you can push your Alexander the Great to the limit, including a detailed breakdown of what exactly has changed in 2020. Hello my friends and welcome back. This is going to be a really exciting video. You requested this over and over as I've been evaluating commanders to talk about their relevance in 2020, and so here we are with the Alexander the Great guide for 2020. There's a lot that's changed, there's a lot that we need to talk about, but before we do, if you like Rise of Kingdoms videos, please do consider subscribing to the channel for daily Rise of Kingdoms content, and if you enjoy what you're watching today, throw a like on the video. It supports the channel, and that will be very helpful. We're also a sponsored content creator, and you can see we've even modeled our own logo after this commander. See the resemblance here? We like him so much. What we're going to talk about in this video will be as follows, and of course, timestamps will be in the description, so you can jump to whatever you'd like in this video. First, how has his role changed in 2020? Then, we'll get a look at the skills, and let me tell you, the skills on this commander are far more complex than meets the eye, and there's a lot of intricacy that really is still left to go and uncover. From there, we'll review some revised builds that we have for 2020, and we'll talk a little bit about how you unlock them and the order in which you max out their skills. Last, but certainly not least, we'll review the pairings, and there are so many because this commander is truly exceptional. So let's dive in to what's changed in 2020, and there's a couple things that are very noteworthy about this commander. First and foremost, this is a commander that reduces healing effectiveness. Now that is very powerful as an effect, but I want to call attention to the fact that there are two other commanders that do this better than Alexander the Great. When the second skill is maxed, you're going to be getting a nice 30% healing effect reduction for 5 seconds. However, I will point out that you get an even better healing effect reduction from Saladin, who offers for a full 5 seconds a 50% healing reduction. And Ramses, my gosh, he will cut off healing entirely for 2 seconds. Totally insane, 100% healing reduction lasting for 2 seconds. So that utility that Alexander the Great offered has a diminished role relative to the role that it used to play because, quite frankly, Ramses is just so much better at reducing healing. However, March speed remains in style in Rise of Kingdoms, and Alexander the Great is a commander that saw a lot of play in Ark of Osiris League. Why is that? In addition to having the utility of the healing reduction, he's got a boatload of March speed, which lets you get around the battlefield quickly or escape combat. He also is providing shielding for nearby allies, which gives a huge amount of sustain. This is a commander that, instead of having an active skill that does damage, he shields himself and one nearby march. In addition, if you have the expertise skill, he also is going to increase the damage taken by nearby enemies by up to 30%, 3 targets for 4 seconds, which is very transformative in Canyon, in Ark of Osiris, in Kingdom versus Kingdom, in any area where you're doing field fighting. And speaking of field fighting, there is an area that is important for us to talk about. In 2020, they created the Light versus Darkness, Kingdom versus Kingdom system, and in this style of Kingdom versus Kingdom, you can only bring one march at a time to fight at the Ancient Ruins or the Altar of Darkness. I personally observed an unbelievable amount of Richard I present in those fights. Guess what? The value of an Alexander the Great in that situation is truly elevated because not only are you countering the healing that they'll do, you also have a lot of march speed, which will help you either get to the fights faster, or retreat from them when you need to. This commander is even better than ever when battling in those altars and ancient ruins, which makes him very, very powerful and a very worthwhile investment, really at any stage of the game for Rise of Kingdoms. In addition, this commander continues to hold dominance in Canyon, both Lost Canyon and Sunset Canyon. It turns out that the astonishing amount of utility that you get from these skills really does make a big difference in a team fight. We see it in Canyon, we see it in League, and we see it as well in Kingdom versus Kingdom. If you were wondering whether or not this is a commander that I think is still worthy of investment in 2020, this is a slam dunk yes. And when I think about the order of commanders that I would recommend that you invest in, that sequence would go as follows. I think everybody should get their Esong expertise. I think Alexander the Great is a very good next target. From there, I generally like some investment into either Richard the First or Constantine, depending on who you have access to at that time, because those commanders can also be very transformative for your Canyon lineup. Unlike a commander like Richard I, who has had more and more counters enter into the game, there aren't really as many counters for Alexander the Great that have entered into Rise of Kingdoms, at least as of yet. Let's now get a look at the skills, and there's so much to talk about with these skills, especially given our understanding of how these work in 2020. We've been doing a lot of testing. Card up in the top if you want to see some testing. You can check out those videos at the end. The first skill on Alexander the Great applies a shield with a damage factor of 1,200 and an additional damage factor of 600 to a nearby target. Now, this is very important because the shielding here is not going to stack on himself if there's no nearby target. In other words, if you have a second march nearby, you get a lot of value from this skill. If you don't, and that can include an ally, if you don't, then you're not going to get as much value over here from this skill because you're only getting the shield on yourself for a factor of 1,200. Again, it does not stack. So this means that this skill will be very, very valuable in group fights and anywhere where there will be an additional march nearby to benefit. And that includes buffing rallies, by the way, which is kind of nuts. There are some questions I still have about this skill. It does indicate that the shield over here has a damage factor that determines how big the shield is. Now look, I've not done as much investigation into this as I want to and plan to do, but I'm just going to raise the question, can you counter the shielding effect on both Charles Martel and Alexander the Great, and maybe counter is not the right word, but reduce the effectiveness of this by reducing their attack? If you reduce their attack, does their damage go down? How does this damage factor exactly work for sort of evaluating the strength of the shield? We don't exactly know. Testing will reveal it, and that's a project I've got in my backlog for another day. Let's look at the next skill, which, by the way, is related while Alexander's troops are on the map, and that means outside of a structure, not in a city, not in a resource node, and that's important. Not in a resource node is important. They are immune to all damage reduction effects. Furthermore, all attacks have a 10% chance to deal an additional direct damage factor of 1,700, which is insane, by the way, to the target and reduce their healing effectiveness by 30% for 5 seconds. A couple things here. The healing effectiveness is amazing, but the damage factor is also extremely high. So although you're not getting a lot of damage factor on the first skill, if we compare to a commander like, let's just look at El Cid, right? He's got a skill that does a damage factor of 1,200, which, man, when you compare to Alexander the Great, you are getting so much more on the second skill. It is really astonishing how much more you're given on Alexander the Great's second skill. Truly remarkable. The ability to prevent damage reduction effects means that you're going to be able to deal a lot of damage, and there's some anti-swarm technology in here, right? If you get a rally going with this commander and it's getting swarmed, all the debuffs that would reduce the damage aren't going to apply. Now, there's a test I need to run to determine if that is attack reduction and damage reduction, or if the language here really is as precise as it implies, which is only damage reduction effects. And yes, those are two different things. But let me just focus in on this on the map portion for a second, because when you're battling at the Altars of Darkness or Ancient Ruins, you might be inclined to go put your troops into a resource node and to let the enemy hit you while you're in that node until it's convenient for you to leave. I did that many times with Guan and Alex, and I didn't realize that resource nodes most likely count as a structure such that you are no longer on the map. So that means, by the way, that I believe both portions of this skill, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not, both portions of this skill are not going to apply because you're no longer on the map, which means you're not going to get this damage factor, which you really don't want to take fights from a resource node. This commander is really not a garrison commander. They're an open field commander. And by the way, if you're rallying something, you do qualify as being in the open field. The next skill is going to give 30% march speed and 30% attack. That is just amazing. That is actually just phenomenal. That is an unbelievable amount of march speed for infantry. And I don't know that there's a commander that offers more march speed in the game for infantry at this time. So you are going to get a lot of speed and a lot of punch. 30% attack is a massive amount, all on one skill. You're getting unbelievable value and unbelievable rate on this commander. The final skill we need to look at is the fourth skill, attack increased by 40% when you don't have a shield. And when your shield is active, instead of having 40% attack, you will have 30% extra defense. Really solid. You're getting a cool 70% attack between these two skills, which is astonishing. And in this last skill, 40% of that attack will convert over to be defense while your shield is active. The expertise skill we already covered earlier in this video. It makes it so that your active skill increases the damage taken by nearby enemies, up to 3 of them, by 30% for 4 seconds. I mean, increasing the damage taken of a nearby enemy. It's not dealing damage, but it's kind of like you're dealing damage because you're helping everyone who is hitting something nearby deal that extra damage to the target, which is very powerful for a group fight. These skills give us the context we need to go look at some talent builds. And there are some pretty sweet builds, although the options are limited because this commander is a versatility commander. They're infantry, attack, and versatility. The funny thing about the versatility tree is that because it's so versatile, it's not actually good at anything. I prefer in video games when we can go and min-max. That's an idea that refers to sacrificing all other things at the sort of gain of being incredibly good at one thing. Well, versatility is like, oh yeah, I'll do a little gathering, little city hitting, little city defending. It just makes no sense for this commander, based on what he's trying to do, to put points into that tree. At least I haven't found a reason. So infantry and attack are where we're going to focus our talents today. And the first build we're going to show you is for the open field. I've gone in and I've basically maxed the infantry tree, and I'm going all in on march speed. This is a very debatable selection of talents, and there are a few options that you could do here that might actually be better. If what you wanted to do was to try to get a little more punch on the battlefield, you could sacrifice fleet of foot and the defense talent on the left-hand side of the tree to go and get martial mastery. It might even be criminal to use this commander without getting martial mastery. It increases your normal attack damage dealt by 6% and reduces the active skill damage dealt by 3%. Well, if you pick 2 commanders that don't do skill damage, this is pretty amazing. And I should be very cautious with my wording here because this says active skill damage, which means it's not going to decrease the skill damage dealt by Alexander the Great's second skill. So this only impacts active skill damage, which is really an important call out here. Now, I've gone all in on the infantry tree, in part because the right-hand side of this tree has march speed, and I really want that in most open field fights. Another questionable talent, however, is effortless. For every 10 seconds you're in combat, you get an extra 2.5% damage dealt. This is questionable because, honestly, most field fights are short. It's unlikely the enemy will just stand there until you kill them or they kill you. So I think one thing you could do is ditch these talent points over here, ditch the defense point over here, and then get your martial mastery. Again, I think it might even be criminal to have a build with this commander that doesn't have martial mastery, but we did use this build for a time and found it to be very, very effective in Ark of Osiris, where you are more likely to get the benefit of effortless as you swarm down structures. In Ark of Osiris, you want all this march speed. You want effortless because you're going to really get a lot of value from those talents. The next build we're going to go look at is for Canyon. And in Canyon, you don't care about march speed because you're not trying to get anywhere. If you're using this commander in Canyon, I've gone in and made some of those changes that I was just recommending, where I cut out Fleet of Foot and I cut out the defense talent point. Now, by the way, worth mentioning, you want health over defense because we've proven that is arguably one of the best stats to have in Rise of Kingdoms. The card is up in the top. If you want to check that out at the end of this video, it will be there for you. So I like this build in Canyon, and I used it for a time when he was the primary commander. Yes, I still have some of the march speed over here. However, I did find that this was very effective, in part because you're getting just an astonishing amount of stats. And there is one other option that you could use for Canyon or for rallying, and that build is this one right over here. Now we've really gone off the deep end and cut out everything we possibly can that doesn't help you for basically taking down a structure. You don't care about this march speed. You don't care about this march speed. You're not going to be hitting the same target as maybe like an Ethelflaed, so you might get some benefit from march speed on, reduction on the target if you're in a game mode like Canyon. No, we've gone just 100% all in on dealing as much damage as we can with a rally, or honestly, like, you could use this in Canyon. There is a little bit of a downside, however, which is this right over here. Increases all damage dealt by 6% and also increases all damage taken by 3%. The thing is that if you're using Alexander the Great to rally and somebody tries to swarm your rally, yeah, it sucks if you're taking 3% more damage, but the amount of damage you're dealing back is just ridiculous with counterattacks and skill attacks if you're using like an E-Song paired with him. It is a very exceptional build, and we've made only one small modification to this build. It's otherwise original from what one of my former Alliance members in Kingdom 39 shared with me from KVK Season 2. Abby shared a version of this build. We removed 1 point from over here to put it into the versatility tree. I know I just finished saying this was not a tree I think much of, because health is a better stat than defense, and we're not going to get into why that is in this video. Oh man, different can of worms. This build is very exceptional for rallying. If I had to rally with this commander today, I would default to this build without hesitation. It's really maximized everything you can do for delivering offensive punch, and has no talent points that deliver no value. Given these builds and skills, what's the order in which I would recommend you level up the skills on Alexander the Great? My recommendation is that you absolutely max the first skill and the second skill before you star up the commander. So star them up only after you max the first skill, then after you max the second skill. Now from there, if you're going to be using them as a primary commander, and they are good for that, then you would take them to 4 stars if you wanted and apply further skills. If you have infinite patience, I do think that the march speed and attack is generally a bit better than the 4th skill. So I would prefer maxing the first 3, but like, look, you take them to, max the first, max the second, and you're in good shape. 5-5-1-1. You can start leveling them up by battling barbarians and do that process slowly rather than having to burst it out with a bunch of experience tomes. I think that's a fine choice. I personally will be investing in this commander probably in a live stream in the not too distant future on my restart project because it's just that Good. Alexander the Great is going to be available to you from the Wheel of Fortune. And the Wheel of Fortune is a pretty cool event in terms of value for spending gems. If you wanted to do this event nearly free to play, you would need to farm gems from the map. Card up in the top for how you can farm at least 1,000 gems a day, and some people have messaged me saying they've done 3,000 gems a day. You're basically trading an astonishing amount of time for gems in Rise of Kingdoms, but there's a way to do that. Check out that card if you want to see all about that. Now, after this commander has been in the Wheel of Fortune, and it's many months down the road, they should eventually show up in the Card King. Card King will let you get commanders that you didn't get otherwise, so if you didn't get Alexander the Great from the wheels, no worries, you will eventually have that opportunity from Card King, but I really would recommend everybody unlock this commander at their earliest opportunity, and taking them to 5-5-1-1 will transform your Canyon team. Now, as we get a look into the pairings, there is so much you can do with this commander. What I'd like to do is call attention to the fact that only this skill cares about infantry. He still has 3 skills that give you full benefit without having infantry in your march, which means Alexander the Great can be paired with an astonishing amount of commanders in an astonishing amount of contexts. So we're going to break this down, starting with legendary infantry. Legendary infantry pairings for Alexander the Great are very strong. Richard I is an exceptional pair. I used Richard and Alexander together in the Ancient Ruins and Altars of Darkness. I liked having Richard as the primary and Alex as the secondary to hide the fact that I had all that utility and to avoid making myself a big target, because yeah, people will target down an Alexander the Great, and they should. I also really like Alexander the Great paired as the primary if what you want to do is bring a lot more punch and attack from the attack tree. The Richard I brings you defense as a primary. Alexander the Great brings you punch. Pick which one of those you need, but I generally prefer to hide the Alex behind the Richard. Now, Charles Martel as a secondary to Alexander the Great was, in my opinion, one of the very best rally combos in Season 2 of Kingdom vs. Kingdom. That most likely has changed now that, for whatever reason, you're allowed to have Wu Zetian in KVK Season 2 if somebody migrates in with it, which feels a little weird to me. There was a time where Alex and Martel were the king of rallies, and yeah, they did some work. They will, however, have one slight issue, which is that their shields do not stack. In other words, you'll have your Alexander the Great shield active if he's the primary. There'll be a second of downtime between their skills firing off. Then Charles Martel's shield is going to fire off, and the shield will apply. That shield is going to overwrite any remaining amount of shield left from your Alexander the Great. So, in my experience, you're usually taking so much damage from normal attacks and counterattacks that the shield will have worn off. The amount that might be left is really not meaningful anyways, and so I wouldn't worry about the fact that their shields do not stack. In a best case, you honestly have shields that keep your marches really, really healthy for a very long time, and you have a high amount of shield uptime between the two of them. These two as a pair work very, very well, and I really can recommend them highly, especially for giving a lot of march speed. And Charles Martel does something for Alexander the Great that he wasn't getting elsewhere, which is he gives him health, and he gives him defense. Those are very, very powerful. I really like these two as a pair, and I can highly recommend them from personal experience. Now, the next infantry pairing we need to get a look at is Constantine. If you pair these two together, I think Constantine should be the primary because the support tree has a way to rapid fire the skills and the rage generation from your commanders. So if you use Constantine primary, you're going to get a lot more shields. You're going to get a lot more of Alexander the Great's debuff applied. Use them together in the field, and they are phenomenal for that. You won't have any march speed from Constantine, but that's okay. You're getting it all from your Alexander the Great, and health is just a phenomenal stat to round out what that pair of commanders is doing. The next infantry commander we need to go and get a look at is going to be one that I personally have not put much investment into, and that's Leonidas. Leonidas is not a commander I really would recommend for anything but Canyon. Most of what he does only gets exceptional when he's either below 50% or below 10%, it just doesn't make much sense for most situations. Yes, Leonidas is a fine commander in the field, but I really wouldn't be looking to pair him with Alex. I think you can probably do better. One other commander we do need to look at, and funny that I forgot this nearly, Guan Yu as an infantry pairing is the one that I personally use in Ark of Osiris and in the open field. Guan with Alex gives a ton of march speed, they do a ton of damage, and Guan really wanted the tankiness that is provided from the Alexander the Great shield. As a pairing, these two are very exceptional. And one thing I want to call your attention to, and a lot of people don't realize, is that if you're going to spec your Guan Yu something like this in a game mode, even like Canyon, and yeah, I have them paired together in Canyon as well. There are talents here that increase skill damage, and I just want to call attention to the fact that there's a difference between an active skill and increasing active skill damage and increasing all skill damage. Because I am pretty sure, and we've got to go and test this, that things like clarity, that things like tactical mastery will actually increase the skill damage of Alexander the Great's second skill. So there actually is a moderate amount of synergy between the skill tree with a Guam primary and an Alexander the Great secondary, even though, okay, you lose, some amount of benefit here because active skill damage is not something that you're going to deal with your Alexander the Great. Let's get a look now at the non-infantry legendary pairings. And there are a lot of them, so we'll go quickly. Alexander the Great primary with Esong secondary, bringing full infantry, is a top rally combo. It's a top open field combo. I highly recommend that you put these two commanders together. They will do some serious work. You could pair with Cao Cao, but honestly, Double C, Minamoto, Barca, none of these commanders are particularly synergistic, and I will be looking elsewhere than those pairings. Saladin and Khan, however, are very strangely effective with Alexander the Great. Because Alexander the Great's third skill is the only one that cares about infantry, yeah, rapid firing shields with Khan is really good. And yeah, rapid firing shields with Saladin from the support tree is really good, and Saladin even brings a lot of tankiness. Use the cavalry as the primary, bring full cavalry, Alexander the secondary, and that actually works ridiculously well. Similarly, you can use Alexander the Great as a secondary for Ethelfled and bring mostly infantry to that fight. This is something that some people do in Canyon, and it works really well there. I haven't seen that as much, however, for the open field because you do want to have mixed troops to get the full benefit of Ethelfled. I don't think that Edward of Woodstock or Attila or Takeda are pairings that make sense, but I do actually think you could do some work with Freddy and also Alexander the Great as a pair. I would use Freddy as the primary, Alex as the secondary. Unfortunately, Freddy is not getting a lot of rage gen from that pairing, so I think that's a fine pairing, but not amazing. Similarly, I do feel that Alexander the Great could be a secondary to Julius for a really tanky march, or vice versa. You could flip it the other way around. But I don't feel like you're going to get as much value as you could with other pairings, particularly the infantry pairings, are far more compelling. I would not pair with an archer commander like El Cid, even though theoretically you could bring full infantry and there's only kind of one talent here that cares about archers. I would stick to bringing other commanders than El Cid. I wouldn't use Tamaris with your Alexander the Great, but Mehmed, oh baby. Alexander the Great primary with Mehmed secondary to hit some cities, whew, I think that would do some work. I would consider using that for sure, especially if for some reason they have any healing whatsoever for their city's garrison. Yeah, you could do some serious shredding with that combo. I would not pair with Ramses or Artemisia, and I've purposefully skipped all the garrison commanders because you shouldn't be using Alexander the Great in a garrison. And I suppose one last commander we could talk about is Charlemagne. I don't think this commander is particularly amazing. I don't think that these shields will stack between the two of them, so there is a little bit of anti-synergy here. And unlike the situation with Charles Martel and Alexander the Great, where the shields will never align because you always have the one shield, a second of downtime, then the next shield, It is conceivable that you could have Alexander the Great use his active skill at the same time this would have procced, and then those skills don't end up stacking. I haven't tested that, and there's not really a need to test it because I just wouldn't use them as a pairing. Let's go get a look at the epic infantry pairings, and there are some really solid ones. Sun Tzu is a natural pair. Use him as the primary, use him as the secondary. Honestly, it doesn't matter. They're freaking outstanding together. Olgi Mundok would be a fine pairing for Alexander the Great. However, by the time you have options like Alexander the Great, I would like to think you can do better than an Olgi Mundok. Sun Tzu is the prime example of a commander that I think does so much more, and quite frankly, I think even a commander like Boudica might offer more than an Olgi Mundok because you really wanted Rage Generation, you really wanted some healing to get more sustain into your Alexander the Great march, and the extra damage here could be completely gangbuster if you have your Alexander the Great second skill proc bonus damage. Now, I've already drifted into epic commanders that do not, that's right, do not require infantry. Boudica is one such commander, but there are others. Going from top to bottom from my roster, do not pair with archer commanders. It really doesn't make much sense. You could pair with a Joan of Arc and use Joan of Arc as the primary. This, I think, would work really well in Canyon to use the support tree to add a ton of tankiness to your Alex and get a bunch of value from rapid firing those shields out, just like using an Ethelfled as a primary. You could use Joan of Arc as the primary and bring either full infantry or nearly full infantry. I would not recommend pairing with Pelagius. He cares too much about cavalry, nor would I recommend Belisarius or Baibars. The last option, really, for using a non-infantry commander would be a commander like Osman. There's no real rage engine between the two of them. I suppose you'd want Osman to be the primary and Alex to be the secondary, but just like how I said, you probably can do better than an Olgi Mundok by the time you're getting an Alex. I would like to think you can probably do better than an Osman as well, even as a fully free-to-play player. And between all of those options, I mean, I probably would prioritize playing around with the Boudica before the Olgi, and then the Olgi before using a commander like Osman. All in all, Alexander the Great has retained an unbelievable amount of value in Rise of Kingdoms, and although I wouldn't necessarily he gets better and better over time, he continues to be remarkably powerful as a commander, and at the top of my tier lists. Card up in the top if you want to see one of my recent legendary commander tier lists that'll help you evaluate Alexander the Great against all the other legendary commanders that are available in Rise of Kingdoms. I really do feel that as a legendary, they should be your second or third commander that you go and use your universal legendary commander sculptures on, which really says a lot, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and do that on my restart project very soon. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing to the channel for more daily Rise of Kingdoms videos. Leave a comment down below if you're using Alexander the Great and like his presence on the battlefield, and if there's any information you'd like to share about his relevance in 2020. If you're looking for more Rise of Kingdoms videos related to everything we shared today, check out those cards that we mentioned earlier. There'll be a little button you can push in the upper right-hand side of the screen. I guess it depends on what device you're using, that'll let you go and check out all of those videos that we recommended. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.